Quick, how many nations are in North America? Not including Central America. 3, of course. The United States, Canada, and Mexico. Well, there'll only be 2 once our brothers to the north finally acknowledge the fact that they should join the United States, but let's go with 3. Now, what if there were more than just 3? What if there were, say, 8 nations? That's what we're going to be going over in this scenario. While most of my scenarios are based on some historical fact, it's something that might not be so implausible to happen. This one is just going to be for fun. This isn't realistic and would require a lot of very hard to do changes, so don't take it too seriously. Don't go ranting in the comments about how, oh, actually that would never happen. It's just for fun. Now, there are a couple nations that tried to colonize America in our own timeline, only of which really 3 were successful: England, France, and Spain. Out of the whole, there was England, like I just said, who colonized it. There was a Scottish/Irish attempt at colonizing America. They did a little thing down in Panama, and they founded Nova Scotia, which, based on the name, means New Scotland. So they tried to do something there. Spain, of course, colonized most of the Americas. France had a very large presence. The Dutch owned New York before it became New York and was conquered by the English. This is something a lot of people know, the entire New Amsterdam thing. And if you look at, let's say, the New York City flag, you can see where it's clearly inspired by the Dutch. The Russians, of course, colonized over in Alaska, which America then bought from them. And one thing that isn't very well known, but is definitely true, is that Sweden had a very strong presence for a little bit of time in Denmark, New Jersey, that kind of area, before it was taken over by the Dutch, which was taken over by the English, which then eventually became America, as we know it today. In this alternate timeline, we can start in the late 1580s, like 1588, where we can say that the Spanish Armada still fails. It's not able to completely take over the seas like they were expecting it to, but they are able to maintain their dominance over the Caribbean and Florida. Now, of course, in our own timeline, the Caribbean was very much dispersed between a lot of nations, as despite its small size, it was very, very important. For example, the single British island of Jamaica made more money for them than the entire 13 colonies did. So Spain having a little bit more control over the Caribbean, not by much, as we don't want to weaken the other powers too much, but just a little bit more is going to help out with this scenario. And from here, we can jump forward into the 1600s, in 1607, where Jamestown is founded in Virginia by the English, beginning English America, the same as in our own timeline. 2 years later, in 1609, the Dutch are going to establish trade with the natives along the Hudson River, further up in the continent, along the same lines that they did in our own timeline. And Spain is able to found Santa Fe in this own timeline around 1610. By 1614, the Dutch are able to establish forts along the Hudson, making their presence a lot stronger and able to fortify their overall colony. We're going to go in then 5 years later, where Virginia begins to be better settled and better controlled by the English, where now there's a bunch of Anglican planter elite classes like we see on our own timeline coming about, gaining more control for England over this area. And by 1620, we can see Plymouth began to be colonized by the English Pilgrims, who were Puritans who didn't really agree with England's teachings, so they went there to get away from the English to try to be a bit more free. But as they were technically English and it was kind of funded and connected deeply with England, it is considered an English colony, despite them not wanting to be English. And from here, we can jump forward into the 1620s. in 1625, we can see that New Amsterdam is officially founded by the Dutch West India Company. Up to this point, like I was saying, they've had some relations, they definitely have settlers there, but it's not an official Dutch colony. Well, now they're going to have it be very official, so that means the Dutch are going to have to go out and defend it. If it gets attacked, it's going to be a lot more populated, they're going to send over more people, they're going to have a lot more connection to it than previously. And then in 1630, we can see that Massachusetts is founded by the Puritans under Winthrop, and that is going to much more consolidate and expand the Puritans or Pilgrims' control over that area, while technically doing it, like I said, under England, much more for their own purposes. Near Maryland, be taken control of by the English, and have a lot of Catholics move over there to try to escape the Protestant England, while, like the Puritans, still being part of it and still having a massive English influence being part of their nation. And by 1638, we can see New Sweden being founded along the Delaware River, just like in our own timeline. By 1639, we can see that the Scottish are able to establish Nova Scotia, being more renewed, being a stronger presence, and having more backing from an independent Scottish crown. From here, we can go into some of the major wars that we're going to need to alter to allow this scenario to truly take off from this point on. We can start this off by talking about the English Civil War around this time period. We can say that this war becomes much longer and bloodier, having a much more damaging effect on England overall. We can say that early on, the people looking to establish a parliament have gained, but due to infighting and exhaustion just generally throughout England, they begin to collapse. That allows the royalists to slowly be able to regain control under a hardened, more controlling authoritarian Charles I, making most of the parliament leaders be exiled or executed, having this war result in a royalist victory, which is different. In our own timeline, the people looking to establish a parliament won, and then eventually said that the crown could come back. On this timeline, the crown is never going to leave, and we're going to see Charles's dynasty continue to exist unbroken in England. It's going to make England a bit of a weaker power, as Charles's dynasty wasn't the best as they were kings. They were working more in their self-interest than in the interest of the nation, and we can say that because they're so damaged and trying to rebuild at this point, that their colonial efforts are going to be scaled back. Not like in our own timeline where they were this massive power always looking to expand. Maybe they're just slightly more isolationist, not looking to take everybody else's colonies like they did to the Dutch in our own timeline, possibly allowing something like that to survive for longer and fortify itself so that when the English do try to come and take it, they're not able to do that successfully. And this is going to be at the absolute dismay of those pilgrims in New England, as they hated the king as he was repressing them. So they are going to not recognize his authority. They're still going to recognize Parliament as being the ones controlling England. This is going to put a massive wedge between the pilgrims in New England and the English government itself. While again, technically they're still part of England, they can be seen more as a place in revolt with a lot of autonomy, not working with England the same way they did before. And from here, we can see a difference in that 30 Years' War, which was also happening at this exact same time. We could say that in general, Sweden becomes less entangled in the war, and instead maybe improves its navy a bit. This is going to allow Spain to have a much easier time in this war, as for most of the war itself, or at least the most important parts of it, Sweden and Spain, or Sweden and the Habsburgs, were the main ones fighting. By removing Spain, that allows the Habsburgs to have many, many more years where they are completely uncontested on the continent. And this is going to leak over into the 80 Years' War that we also have going on at this time, where the Dutch are trying to gain independence fully from the Spanish. We can say that because there's a weaker presence from Sweden not being overcommitted, we can see that the Dutch are going to be pushed back more. We're going to say that the French get involved around the same time. They're not going to do as good in our own timeline since they don't have Swedish help, but by the time the Franks were joining in our own timeline, Sweden had very much scaled back their involvement, so Spanish wouldn't have had years of fighting and getting weakened, but they also wouldn't have better strategies, as during the 30 Years' War, the Spanish and Austrians learned by watching and fighting against the Swedish how they should fix their own formations, as Sweden at this time had by far the best tactics of anybody in the world. But by the end of the 30 Years' War, everybody had learned from them and was able to adapt that into their own military. If they hadn't been fighting against the Swedish, they wouldn't have learned from that, but like I said, would still have more military left over since they hadn't been losing battles against the Swedes, allowing France versus Spain to happen mostly the same as it did in our own timeline. But like I was saying, the Dutch are going to be weaker, they're going to be pushed back a bit more by the Spanish, so the Dutch are still going to gain independence, but not going to be as strong or have as great of a presence as they did in our own timeline. And from here, we can see the English trying to gain control of these Dutch colonies. But like I was saying, the Dutch are more fortified, and though they're a bit smaller and weaker, England has been hit much harder by that first civil war, so we're going to see in the first Anglo-Dutch war, the royalists who are weak aren't going to be able to take New Amsterdam, and the Dutch are going to be allowed to hang on to that. And from here we can see later in about 1655, Sweden is going to be able to defeat the Dutch, securing New Sweden. In our own timeline, like I was saying at the beginning, the Dutch came down and they tried to take Sweden, New Sweden, from the Swedish Empire, and it was very successful as Sweden had just gotten out of this long, brutal, bloody war in which their king Gustavus Adolphus had died at the Battle of Lutzen. Well, in this timeline, Gustavus Adolphus is still alive. His tactics haven't been used yet, so no one's prepared to fight against the way he does. Sweden has a stronger navy and a general stronger presence in America, and if we say that they fortified a bit more, it would be incredibly difficult for the Dutch to take this from the Swedes, especially if Gustavus Adolphus is willing to personally go to America and lead his forces. He was such an amazing commander in that early stages of the 30 Years' War before he died, when nobody had fought against him yet and used his own strategies against him, that he would be able to completely easily push back the Dutch. Now, New Sweden wasn't a very populated colony, so it's almost impossible for them really to expand that much. They're not going to be up conquering New York because they just don't have enough people to go up and take New Amsterdam from the Dutch, but they will be able to expand and make themselves a much stronger presence on the continent out of this, as instead of trying to take Germany, their entire military might is just going to be barreling down on the other powers in America. And like I said, the French are going to be much around the same strength as our own timeline, able to establish a very large presence in Canada, and maybe expand down to the Great Lakes, working with the natives. So they're not going to take a lot of land, as they don't want to upset the natives, still want the natives to have their own little piece of land, but they are going to be able to expand a bit more, especially with that English presence being a lot more lacking. You're going to see them able to be a little bit better than in our own timeline. And in general, the Protestants are going to be able to not accomplish as much out of the 30 Years' War once it ends. So we're going to see Spain be able to be a bit more stronger in the Americas, not being way stronger than our own timeline, as they were still a very not stable empire around this time. Their finances were very poor, but they wouldn't be on the brink of collapse. They wouldn't be able to be pushed around by other powers. From here, we can see the Spanish able to consolidate Florida most of Louisiana, maybe pushing a bit up the Mississippi River, and able to mostly consolidate North Mexico and that corridor. And from the north, the French themselves are going to be pushing down the Louisiana River. In our own timeline, the Spanish and French very much fought each other over the Louisiana territory and who would gain control over it. You're going to see it pass back and forth many, many times. It's going to go from Spain to France, back to Spain, back to France, over to America out of nowhere from Napoleon. And it's just a very hotly contested area. So we're going to see that contest be pushed tenfold in this own timeline. Here we can see around 1660, because of this royalist power being back in England, New England and the Puritans are going to be able to begin pushing away even more and beginning to distance themselves from that brutal English royalist rule, preparing themselves to possibly gain independence. And from here we can see around 1663, Massachusetts is going to refuse to be having a royal governor. And the Puritans are going to be able to organize their own sort of defense leagues or defense militias, creating their own national identity while still technically still being part of England, still now being even more autonomous than before. In 1664, we're going to see England again try to take the New Netherlands, but due to their weaker navy and internal disorder, not be able to accomplish that goal at all. And from here we can see the Scottish settlers over in Nova Scotia, or Scottish/Irish settlers over in Nova Scotia, beginning to form a functioning colonial assembly, this kind of Gaelic Presbyterian colony, and it's going to be able to solidify being a now permanent presence in the Americas that would need to be kicked out in a war, not just leaving out of nowhere. And we can see that France continues to establish outposts along the Mississippi River from Canada down towards Louisiana. And again, this is going to highlight the tensions between Spain and France, as they are both Catholic powers, but they just fought against each other in the 30 Years' War, and now they're contesting over this Louisiana territory. They're not going to be very big fans of each other. And from here, from 1675 to 1678, we can see King Philip's War devastate New England, but as wars so often do, it's going to bring together these Puritans under a shared cause, allowing this national identity or this autonomous region to begin to consolidate even further, just building and building over time. And from here, we can see in 1678, them finally declaring independence from England. This is going to be issued in Boston, and Massachusetts is going to become independent. From here, we can see the Puritans adopting a New Israel charter, and this is going to make them a theocratic republic, and they're going to push up into New England, as again, England doesn't have the best presence around this time. Most people in this area are going to be Pilgrims and Puritans, so they're going to have a very easy time trying to consolidate all of that. From here, we can see the Spanish fortifying most of their coastal cities along that kind of Gulf of Mexico, and be able to prevent the French and English from encroaching too much. This is going to happen in areas like St. Louis, Mobile, places like that. And from here, we can end in the 1690s into the 1700s, where you can see Russia begin to establish permanent outposts in Alaska, launching Russian America, much like in our own timeline, if having a little bit stronger push than our own timeline to colonize Alaska, so that gets started a bit earlier. We can see Scottish America expanding a little bit more along the Acadian coast and the Bay of Fundy. We can see English America, which would be mostly around Virginia, Maryland, the Carolinas, Barbados, and linked territories, to make a very big slavery-based plantation society like in our own timeline, but lacking the North, which would have contested that and tried to keep slavery at bay a bit. And from here, we can end this scenario in 1700, where conflict looms with border skirmishes happening between the Dutch, the Swedish, the Puritans, and the British over that kind of Pennsylvania, a little bit south, a little bit north area, where there's no clear leader. You can see the Spanish and French fighting a lot over Louisiana and that greater Central American center of the United States area, and just generally nobody very much likes each other. Everybody has some beef with a different power, except for really Russia. Russia's not doing much. They're kind of just chill guys in the corner. But conflict is definitely present, and we will definitely see conflict break out over who gets to control the Americas, creating those 8 Americas we were talking about, where there's a solid English America, a very well-founded Scottish/Irish America, there's a clear Spanish America, like in our own timeline. The French are much like in our own timeline, where they have a solid America, if being a little bit expanded. The Dutch are able to maintain New Amsterdam and that northern area. The Swedish are able to consolidate their region, fortify it a lot, where again, this is going to be by far the least populated area, but they still have very good tactics and are able to hold on to it. We can see Russia again being established all alone in their lonely little Alaskan corner, and we can see this independent Puritan Massachusetts, New England style thing at this point. And from here, we're going to see a very interesting America in general. We're probably going to have a Charles III of some kind ruling England. He's probably not going to be the best leader, but since this Charles line has been unbroken from Charles I to Charles II, we could probably see a Charles III being created. And Scottish America, there would probably be some Stuart governor. It would be completely independent from England still, as there were some agreements and deals made during the Civil War that if we see the Royalists win, we're probably not going to see an act of union between the Scottish and English, allowing the Stuarts to maintain control over that area. And we're going to have Charles II still leading. He's a very sickly, not very good leader, as the inbreeding definitely got to him. If you see a picture of him, you can tell he's not the most normal. In the French America, we're still going to have Louis XIV leading. He's a very strong, very good leader, able to consolidate that. In the Dutch, we are going to have William of Orange leading, as there's going to be no glorious revolution due to the English Civil War turning out the way it did, allowing him to maintain a position in the Netherlands, focusing more on that, and allowing the Netherlands to recover from the 80 Years' War, in which they didn't do as well, despite definitely having issues there. And in Sweden, we are going to have Carolus Rex leading that, and he is of course a very famous ruler. He's going to be in charge around this point, as despite the fact that Gustavus Adolphus didn't die in this timeline, there would be no reason he wouldn't take charge. And of course, he's this amazing military general, commanding one of the best militaries, if not the best military in the world at this time, strictly army speaking, allowing him to again have potential to continue their grasp in America, as Sweden is really going to have that kind of 50 to 70 year span where they are a very, very strong power, able to punch way above their weight class with very strong leaders. In Russia, we're going to have Peter the Great controlling Russia, and of course, he modernized Russia. He did very good overall. And in Massachusetts, we're going to have probably a theocratic council leading all of that. So it's going to be a very interesting time where there's a lot of very, very strong leaders who have their own way of looking at things. And from here, it would be impossible for me to keep predicting how things would turn out, which is why I'm not going to keep predicting it. I'm going to allow the viewers to begin to do this. I'm going to post a link to our server's Discord in the description, and you will be able to join, and if you're one of the few chosen, be able to represent one of the Americas in an upcoming debate. which will allow you to control how that nation is going to shape out. More specifics will be in that server. And this will allow me to, shortly in the future, be able to make an update to this video where things are going to be able to turn out very differently. And now this is going to the point where I ask you to like and subscribe, as I very, very much do appreciate it. I always try to reply to every comment I get, and of course this is all a one-man operation, so if it takes me a bit to respond, that should be understandable, but I will always try to do that. And looking at how long this is, I'll probably have stolen at least 26 minutes from your life, and I believe that fact alone makes me deserve just one little like or subscribe from you if you have watched to this point. Please comment, please leave some kind of suggestion below, as I really, really do appreciate it. I'm a very small channel trying to grow, and anything helps. And that's about it. Peace.